Just to record it there, just to be safe. Okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol niyeh b'dvaroi. Okay, so Be'ezras Hashem Siyata D'Shmaya. I think I may have heard the bell ring, so it could be there's somebody downstairs if you want to check. We continue this Siyata D'Shmaya with Torah Lamed Vav. Today's shir is sponsored by Zev Klein, Le'ilei Nishmas, his parents Rivka, Bryndel, Daas, Tzvi, Simcha, and Ya'akov and Yeshayahu. Also dedicated as a zechus for refuah sheleimah for Chaim Yehoshua ben Chaya Miriam. We should only hear B'suras Taavas, and the Neshama mentioned should have an aliyah. We're very grateful for the sponsorships, so please keep them coming. Thank you very much. So we began yesterday with the 36th lesson, speaking about the connection between the 70 members of Klal Yisrael's nuclear and original family and the 70 nations of the world. And we were speaking a lot about balance and imbalance. We were speaking about the connection between a nation that knows how to keep the balance of midos, which really mean measurements, so knowing how much or how little of something to have, and the nations of the world that, at least in a very general sense, are considered to have the aspect of imbalance in their distance from Torah, which is all about balances. The whole entire Torah emerges from the energy of Tiferes, which is the mediating, synthesizing force between Chesed and Gevura, like we said yesterday at length, the aspect of Ases and Los Ases, all of the different aspects of the Torah of Anoichi and Lo Yeh, which serve, like the Baal Tanya and others write, as the foundation for all of the subsequent mitzvahs aseh, mitzvahs lo aseh, and the Torah is the synthesis between them. Yaakov Avinu v'nasan lanu Torahs emes, titen emes liYaakov, v'chule v'chule v'chule. That's the aspect of Yaakov Avinu, and that's the aspect of the 70 members of Yaakov Avinu's original family, who are reflective of the shivim panim shel Torah, the 70 faces of the Torah. That's all about midos that are balanced. But ultimately, the 70 nations of the world, which we've mentioned now a number of times, according to the Shari'ah and Sharhei, are split 35 under Yishmael and 35 under Esav, which is the ultimate expression of imbalance, right? It's either Chesed or it's Gevura, but regardless, it's way too much of the midos that are necessary for a person to be able to live a balanced life in this world. And therefore, and that's literally what happened, Para and that pasuk over there, where the Chazal tell us that Hashem went to the nations of the world and singled out, fundamentally, our Esav and Yishmael, and both of them rejected the Torah as a result of their desire to have too much of a midah that one should have the right amount of the midah for, but not too much of the midah for. And ultimately, this is, like the Rabbi Nachman is saying over here, a reason for their distance from the Torah. Then we spoke about the necessity for every member of Klal Yisrael, before they receive the Torah, because Har Sinai is a thing that happened in the past, but especially in Chabad, we're saying all the time, every minute, Har Sinai is perpetual in the mystical understanding, so to speak, of what Har Sinai is. It isn't just an event that happens once. Constantly, you b'chol yom be'einecha kechadashim. Every day it should be new. Asher anochi mitzavacha hayoim, right? Like Chazal Darshan. And in that sense, every Jew needs to receive a brand new revelation of Hayra'ah, of Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai, every minute of their life. Certainly every week, every month, every year. Like a person is progressing. Says Rabbi Nachman, the only way that a person can progress in that way is first experiencing exile, so to speak, by the midos of the nations of the world. Again, midos doesn't mean a trait that they have and we fundamentally don't have. It just means measurements, the proper amount or the improper amount of certain spiritual and emotional energies. And ultimately we go into Galus, and as part of that process of Galus, what do we need to do? Says the Rebbe, that Galus is a bechina of labor, is a bechina of a woman who's in the process of giving birth. And just like the Zohar tells us, the ayal, the deer, needs to cry out 70 times before going ahead and being able to give birth, so too that serves as the template, so to speak, for all of Klal Yisrael, who is in labor, so to speak, who is in exile, who is awaiting their connection to the Torah that comes about through properly balanced midos. Prior, they're by the nations of the world, but then they're trying to get closer and to do what's right and to live in a balanced way. they need to cry out 70 times, which again is evoking, bringing out from deep within them that original connection to the 70 members of Yaakov Avinu's family we learn about in this week's parsha, which reflects the 70 faces, the Shivim Panim Shel Torah. As a person does that, then they go through the labor process. Bit by bit, they get closer to the Hisgalus, and then, so to speak, the baby is born, and then they learn something new. And we learned, like, this is just to make it very practical, this is how life works. A person's always self-correcting. Sometimes a person goes too much to one side and then realizes that wasn't what I was looking for, I got to pull back. Sometimes a person realizes they have too much limitation, I need a little bit more flexibility in my life, I'm too rigid. And life is a process of sort of mediating and allowing different circumstantial tensions to enable the person to finally find the center, right? And that's the ultimate goal, that's the ultimate core. Titin, like we said, Titin emes liYaakov v'nasan lanu teras emes. That's the ultimate goal. So I just want to go, we just finished quickly yesterday the first paragraph, so go back to the top of page Nun. In that first paragraph toward the end, I just want to point out one thing. Where the Rebbe said over here, we'll actually start from the first four, the bottom last four words on the first column. Ki koidim his galus shel Torah, azahi bebechinas ibur. Prior to the revelation of Torah, of Hira'ah, of guidance of Hashem in a person's life, it's the aspect of pregnancy. It's the aspect of labor. Shatari hinela mimenu. Or not labor, an aspect of pregnancy. Shatari hinela mimenu. In that state, the Torah, what they need to learn, the curricular element that Hashem is trying to gift that person with is Nelam, it's hidden. Ka'atsamim bebeten amaleya. And he uses a pasuk, I believe it's from Mishlei, that says Ka'atsamim bebeten amaleya, or it's from either Mishlei or Kehales, like Kehales, Ka'atsam, thank you. Ka'atsamim bebeten amaleya, like it literally means bones, but like an embryo that's developing bebeten amaleya, within a full womb. That's one pasuk that he uses to refer to this, that the Torah, so to speak, is in gestation, is developing. And I just want to point out that what's the word here metaphorically that's being used to refer to Torah is the word ka'atsamim. And over here there's a concept of this, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's etzem is in the Torah. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu is one with the Torah. The mitzvahs are evraya de malka, right? And HaKadosh Baruch Hu put himself into the Torah. Anoichi say Chazal, the Gemara in Shabbos, which you mentioned a lot of times. Ana nafshi ksavis yahaves. I have put my soul into this. So it's a very beautiful thing that in this reference that Rabbi Nachman is using this pasuk to refer to the Torah, the word that refers to the Torah is etzem. Ka'atsamim bebeten amaleya. Then he brings another pasuk which literally makes reference to the same idea. Va'anoichi Haster Aster, and that Anoichi, of course, is going to be a reference to this, that Hashem again put himself into the Torah. In other words, it isn't just Torah Hira'ah, general guidance that is being developed as a person goes through this process of exile, of Yerida, and which is ultimately labor necessary to go through in order to be able to access new insight. But it's again, this word insight is just a mask for godliness. This word Torah is just a mask for elokus, right? It's just a mask for being able to meet HaKadosh Baruch Hu face to face, panim al panim, right? And that's what the Rebbe is bringing out. It isn't, again, because one step removed, it's like a person has to go through that process of exile and labor and work through the challenging moments, circumstances, and gain new clarity in order to then receive new information, right? Because that's how you can read it, which is beautiful enough in Halavai. A person should go through life becoming ever wiser. But in Hasidus, it's always deeper. It's not just more information. It's more relationship. It's more panim bepanim. It's more ani l'daydi v'daydi li. It's always about the relationship. So yes, HaKadosh Baruch Hu put himself into the Torah, but the psukim that the Rebbe is going to use are going to refer to Hashem. It's not going to refer to text. Right? It's not going to refer to data. And that's what the Rebbe is doing over here, bringing these psukim ka'atsamim bebeten amaleya. What's developing? Etzem. Hashem is, so to speak, is developing within oneself. Va'anoichi haster astir. It's HaKadosh Baruch Hu that is hidden, and it is HaKadosh Baruch Hu that after the process of galus, exile, and then breaking through to be able to go through this process, cry out to Hashem, to express, like we learned yesterday, authentically our yearning to be higher, to be more elevated. We're then able to break through what we called yesterday, paradoxically, the ceiling of Yerida. And if you haven't heard yesterday's share, so go back and listen. The ceiling of Yerida, and then to burst through into the next process, having gone through that exilic labor, and then broken through to redemption. And that's the next phase of spiritual growth, like we spoke about at length yesterday. Deserts, fields, forests, desert. Okay, so with that we begin Ice Bay. Says the Heilige Rebbe, zechus yagun aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, amen. V'da, a person should know, sheklala shel shivim lashon, the collectivity of all of the 70 languages, which in this context is the 70 nations of the world and their imbalances, shel midasayim hara'is halalu, the ultimate fundamental core and crux of imbalance in one's life, Taavas Ni'uf, is sexual immorality, sexual impurity. Taavas Ni'uf is this lust for ni'uf. So this is something that we already learned, if you remember, in Torah Yud Tes. It's actually kedai to just flip back for a second and read the lashon there, because it's very evocative. Says the Rebbe over here in the beginning of Torah Yud Tes, v'hara hakoilel. He says this in the second column here in Torah Yud Tes on page Chaf Hey Amud Beis. V'hara hakoilel, the ultimate total or fundamental or klalius, primary, general ra. Shekol hara'is shel shivim lashon klulim by, very similar thing, that all of the 70 languages over there was the context of actual language. We spoke about kedusha and chol, and then the intermediary form of klipas noiga we spoke about over there, which is aramis. But the ra koilel shekol hara'is shel shivim lashon klulim by ta'inu tave'eres hamadura shel Taavas Ni'uf. This is universal. Okay, so the Rebbe says over here that's how it goes, and then he gives his prescription over there. But let's return back to Torah Lamed Vav, very similar idea. V'da sheklala shel shivim lashon shel midasayim hara'is halalu hi Taavas Ni'uf. A blemish in this area is the ultimate pigam. What's the pigam? What have we been speaking about? Midas ra'is. How did we translate this idea of midas ra'is? Imbalance. If you think of it, it's an amazing thing, because tikkun abris relies upon shakai, the midah of shakai. And we said two fundamentally contrasting things about shakai. Right, on the one hand, Chazal tell us that shakai, the Gemara says, Misha Amar La'olamai Dai. It's HaKadosh Baruch Hu told his world stop expanding, and shakai is a very limiting force. That's the aspect of Gevura. But on the other hand, and I looked this up, it's not actually in Chazal, it's interesting, but all the Sfarim Kedoshim quote it. It's hard to track down an actual makar, but this is ubiquitous throughout the Sfarim that I've been privileged to learn and see. The idea that shakai also stands for sheyesh dai be'elokusai l'kula beria. It's not a Chazal, but all the Sfarim quote it, particularly the Sfas Emes. Sheyesh dai be'elokusi l'kula beria. Hashem says there's enough godliness to go around. Now that's the contrasting energy of Sha'amar La'ilami Dai, right? Dai is very limiting. Shakai sheyesh dai be'elokusi. There's enough. Like it's abundant. There's enough. It's unlimited. And we went very, very deeply into this when we were speaking about this energy of tikkun abris in the context of finances. Remember we spoke about this idea of a person who's mistapik b'muat, right? Who's able to recognize that within the apparent limitation, adrabah, that's where I can taste infinity, in as much as this is the ultimate revelation of the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu for me. This goes back to Torah Dalet, not getting into that whole sugya now, of what we call yichud kutcha b'richu shchinte. Shchinte being the fundamentally limited experiences of my life parameters, right, and what those are in every way, in relationships, in business, in emotional health, mental well-being, and so on. That's my shechina, so to speak. That's the indwelling manifestation of godliness as it relates to my lived experience. But then within that, I could experience kutchabrichu, right? Meaning within my sha'amar la'olamai dai, if there's yichud kutchabrichu shchinte, in other words, on a very embodied experience, if I bring Hashem into that and recognize that whatever limitation I'm experiencing is actually the total will of the infinite being, right, who with his infinite knowledge that goes infinitely beyond what we're able to grasp, has decided that this is the form that my humble life in this Gilgal, so to speak, should take, so then then I'm good. Then I have whatever I need. Daika within the limitations, and I wouldn't want one iota to be changed. That's called Yichud Kudsha B'Yichud Shchinte in the lashon of Rabbeinu Zechana Levrach, like we learned in the past. Okay. So we spoke about midas rois, which are imbalance. What are the imbalances? And this goes back really to Torah. Bays, we spoke about the Trei Nanan and the Mechasan Al Einin, the two clouds that cover the eye. We learned it later on as well. Is Esav and Yishmael. Is Esav and Yishmael. Or Yishmael and Esav. Yishmael is the aspect of the psoiles of chesed. It's way too much expansivity, right? It's Avram Avinu gone wrong. That's the aspect of Yishmael. And Esav is the aspect of psoiles of gevura. Way too much severity. So in a certain sense, Pekam Abris is a Pekam of both. Because in Shakai, it's supposed to be the perfect balance between Din and Chesed. It's supposed to be respecting the boundaries, the limitations, Amar La'olam die, and at the same time being able to taste within that the ultimate infinitude of plentiful bounty and whatever a person needs to be able to feel okay and content. Pagama bris is punkt 5k. It's the exact opposite. It's a breach of all gevulas, and it's never feeling content. Right? Ein adam meis v'chatzi taavas biyadei. It's a you understand? It's a breach of both. It's mamish the shattering of what Shakai is supposed to be. Respect the boundaries and then experience everything. Over here, it's don't respect the boundaries and experience nothing. It's the flip of the Chesed and Gevura. They flip on each other. And so mamish, says the Rebbe, this therefore is the Raha Koila. What was supposed to be balanced, which is exactly where Shakai is on the system of the spheres, right? Which is aligned with Tiferes. Ya'akov and Yosef Kehal Yedidim. That goes back to Torah Aleph, where we learned that Ya'akov and Yosef are one. In other words, all of the Ya'akov Avinu consciousness that the whole sefer is trying to help us into, which is a consciousness of Geula, and a consciousness of Daas, and a consciousness of Torah Datika Stima, and a consciousness of Mamish Mashiach Torah, is only possible when it's aligned with this Inyan. Because that's the balance, that's the foundation. We learned in Torah Beis, Malchus, Yesod, Tiferes, ultimately Keser. That's the Kava Imsai. That's where everything is heading. Malchus is Tefillah, Yesod is Shmiras Habris, and Tiferes is Daas, is consciousness. That's it. These three elements. That's what the Rebbe wanted from us. These three nekudas. That's the whole ikar of Chaim is to work on these three things. Work on these three things. And then there's the inyan of Keser. We spoke a lot about Chachma and Bina. We spoke even yesterday, right, about uniting the two and bringing about with the principal a purpose of the whole sefer Likutei Moharan, and arguably this sort of sits at the core in this context of Kol HaTorah Kula. Is balance. That's the whole in Pnimis HaTorah, that's the whole tikkun of the Olamais. Olam HaToyu is where there's no center, there's no working in tandem. There's just shattering, everything doing its own nakuda. There's no balance. Olam HaTikkun is where things are reoriented into this system of dialectic, where we begin with a totalizing, unfathomably unifying force called Keser Elyon, that's called Ayin, and then emerges out of Ayin Chachma and Bina, and then are brought back together. Daas, Tiferes, not getting into that now. Chesed, Gevura, Tiferes, Netzach Chod, and again, it's a further and further process of refining. Just going back into the context of what we're learning here from the standpoint of labor and birth, right, of the process of Galus and Geula. It's another metaphor that the Rebbe uses here. It's two metaphors. This process of the spheres themselves as they move toward the final point, which is Malchus, which is fundamentally in the middle, is itself the process of going through Galus to Geula. Because the way that we're describing it now is what's Galus? Imbalance. What's Geula? It's balance. In other words, what's Galus is duality. So another way to say it, away from the unity of the divine. What's geula? It's coming back to the point of unity. And that's literally what it is. Chazal tell us, Klal Yisrael is exiled from Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael, Chazal tell us, is the center of the world. We go into all of the different lands. That's the aspect of, and literally, Ashkenazim, Sephardim, east and west, going to different places of the world. Coming back, Kibbutz Galias is the bechina of coming back to the center. So if you follow the process of the spheres, Keser goes into it. It's strange to say, but emerges out of Keser as the bechina of Galus, is duality, splits, Chachma Bina. But it's going to come back. And the way that it comes back will be more refined. All of reality is a process of moving toward tikkun. When a person understands that the spheros, especially in the world of the Gra, the spheros are the template, not just of the things that we experience, or the Torah or our own physiology, but of time, of history. Every era, you're moving from sphera to sphera to sphera. And as history progresses, Rav Kook wrote so much about this, it's a bechina of aliyas hadaris. Things are getting better and better. Things are moving toward tikkun. Part of the process of moving toward tikkun is shvira. And that's a self-replicating process that occurs on every single strata of reality, not the least of which is our own lives and our own spiritual and emotional development. It's just what happens. We start off unified, like I said yesterday, Asa Likim Es Ha'adam Yashar, and then pshum, Behema Bikshu Cheshbonis Rabbim. That's tayu. Cheshbonis Rabbim. We become scatterbrained. We're all over the place. And then hopefully we pull ourselves back together. And something's fixed. It's not the end of the process though, because again, we have to more tikkun. Going to go through another challenge. That's exactly what happens in the spheres. Says the Rebbe, the fundamental challenge of all challenges in this context is Taavas Ni'uf. And therefore breaking this taiva, elevating this taiva, embracing it, so to speak, and putting it in its proper place and channeling those energies and working through what ought to be worked through, says the Rebbe, V'hu tikkun haklali. Tikkun abris is the ultimate tikkun. It's the tikkun haklali. And misha mishaber hataiva hazois, a person who manages to overcome this particular taiva, as I bekal yochel l'shaber kol hataivas. Everything else will be easy and will follow this. If a person manages to work on this area, which is so crucial today in our generation, it's the greatest challenge. As I bekal, says the Rebbe, it will be easy for yachol l'shaber kol hataivas, easily possible for the person to go ahead and to be mishaber all of the taivas. Ubishvilza, therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu, Lifishu Kalal Shel Hiskalos HaTorah. Moshe Rabbeinu represents the ultimate revelation of the Torah Kedosha. Moshe Rabbeinu is the Torah. He's the sarsur. Without Moshe Rabbeinu, you have nothing. Vayaminu ba'Hashem uba Moshe Avdai. Shuhu b'chinas Daas. Moshe Rabbeinu is the aspect of Daas. Ki HaTorah nikra reishis Daas. The pasuk in Mishlei refers to the Torah Kedosha as a reishis Daas, the primary fundamental awareness, consciousness. Gami, son, it's brought in the Svarim Akdashim Kehal Amukas, Sefer Kana, others. Moshe Rabbeinu oila b'gematria taryag. The words Moshe Rabbeinu, fascinatingly enough, have the numerical value of 613. Moshe Rabbeinu is itself the Torah, so to speak. Shu klalos kala Torah. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu is. So b'shvil zah yitzarich lefresh atzmei mikol v'kol. Moshe Rabbeinu, who accesses the highest level of revelation, needs to remove himself from this taiva mikol v'kol. And this is a really challenging concept to understand. That's something that people have reached out to me about in the past. Everything that we're taught about the marital union, right, between husband and wife, is that it's the holiest, highest, most spiritual moment, and we're not, Christian, monks who separate ourselves from this worldliness and other the whole Yisod of Yiddishkeit is, and the truth is, I guess in a certain sense, the tension manifests most explicitly in this kind of context when you speak about Moshe, who was Parish Isha and didn't go back. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, "Ata poi madi," we're going to say, or right, you amoidi madi. We're about to see Ata poi amoidi madi. So it's the most extreme there. But if you really think of it, the whole concept of perishus, as it relates to this approach of integrating physicality and spirituality, is also in tension with this idea. Perishus. What do you mean perishus? The whole Indian is to live in this world. No, but you're supposed to be perishus from the world. To what extent should a person be perishus from the world? Because if you take that all the way to the nth degree, right, and perishus, like, so then theologically, it would appear that the distinction between Yiddishkeit, which is so integrative with this world, and the other religions, Lahavdil, begins to thin. There are a number of resolutions to this. One of the resolutions is, and you find this in the Ishbitzer Sfarim and the Mea Shilach, first perishus and then integration, right? Meaning a person has to be able to be mevarer their ego, right? And so they have to know, okay, it's very beautiful today. Rav Weinberger just gave a little rant that was going around yesterday about this Indian of like Gashmias, and people being malanit tzaitzis, with like thousands and thousands of pounds whiskeys and I'm not going to use that all, but and meat boards and all these things, like, that's not what the Baal Shem Tov meant. You know what I'm saying? Like, you could say aliyas tzaitzis all you want. This is the opposite of the ruach of Chassidus, right? So that's obvious. So the Ishbitzer says first perishus, meaning first make sure that a person's mevar, it's not about me, and it's not for my own pleasure, and it's not for my own gain. Then you can go back into that world, and then you do the avodah of aliyas tzaitzis. That's one of the resolutions for it. But that wouldn't be relevant for what we're learning about here, because Moshe Rabbeinu didn't go back. Moshe Rabbeinu reached a level where he was pirish mini isha, period. Rabbi Nachman actually, if you remember, in Shir Na'im, in his poem, which is like the Hakdama to Likutei Moharan, he literally writes that in the fourth line. Turn back for a second to Shir Na'im. It's right before Torah Aleph. Let's just read the first 4 lines inside again. All of the religions are incomparable to our revelation. The mitzvahs, most specifically the mitzvahs of the other religions, are created by their own wise men. And Moshe Rabbeinu literally went up to Shemayim. This is not a subjective experience. This is objective reality. Nimsa HaMechuyev Dibor Ima B'chol Pam. The Nimsa HaMechuyev spoke with HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'chol Pam. And then what does the Rebbe say? Uperish min ha'isha. And he separated himself from his wife. This is like you see it. I mean, it's encoded. Right? Shir Na'im is the Rebbe's whole theology. Shir Na'im, that poem, includes all the major themes that are going to show up again and again. You find this Nikuda is very, very prominent there. Uperish min ha'isha. Why is this so extreme? Is because you don't consider Taavas Ni'uf to be relevant in the context of one's not just mutter, but mechuyev, not just mechuyev, but spiritually ecstatic relationship with one's own wife. But there is such a thing. Again, I'm asking a kasha. I'm not answering it. I'm just sharing. Okay, you see that we're wrong, right? You see that there is such an akuda. The place this becomes specifically relevant is because Moshe Rabbeinu is one thing. But I mentioned in a shir at one point that Rabbi Nachman, in his second marriage, only married Al Tanai that she would be okay without marital relations between them. So the one who's teaching us this Torah himself got to a point where perish min isha legamri. Hard to grapple with that. How could the one who's teaching us about kedusha in the derech of the Baal Shem Tov? I don't know. These are good questions. But you see that it's such an akuda exists. The one thing that I can think of is that it's tzaddik emes is different. Meaning, this is not. There were other things also that Rabbi Nachman told the chevra. And it sounds very bad, like pedagogically, to say such a thing. But this is what he told them: do as I say and not as I do. He told them that explicitly, particularly about Simcha, fascinatingly enough. He said, I'm a descendant of the Baal Shem Tov, who's a descendant of David HaMelech. Baruch Mezritzer said something similar. And we are melancholic souls. We are depressive souls. So he said, don't learn from, he said, don't learn from what I do. I know it sounds crazy, like, it's like, right, it's supposed to be the opposite, it's supposed to lead by example. But if a person is in some sense miyuchad, right, and that genuinely true. Obviously, everybody can claim to be that way, and then everybody's the exception to every rule. But again, we have enough anecdotal evidence that this person was absolutely remarkable in millions of ways to say, okay, this was his thing. And he told them, this is for me, this is not for you. There are other things like that also. For example, being Isaac in philosophy. The Rebbe's fire against philosophy, not just secular philosophy, Jewish philosophy, kiyadua, not to philosophize and to go into that whole world of stay within revelation, stay within perishus bar likim. Like the Rebbe says in Sichas Ran, HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't open the Torah with proofs that the Torah is true. He just told us between Pshitas, perishus bar likim, stay within revelation. The Rebbe's, but at the same time, the Rebbe tells us very clearly in Tinyana that tzaddik emes needs to know all the philosophy in the world, needs to know everything. He knew the books in Greek, the original Greek books of philosophy, Baal Peh. When he was dealing with the maskilim, and one of them once came to him, I told this over, Hirschber, one of the maskilim that the Rebbe would play chess with and hang out with, long before anybody else was with this approach, the Rebbe was mamish embracing and spending time with, and one day one of them came in holding a book, and he was ashamed to show the Rebbe. He was holding it behind his back because he knew the Rebbe's strong opposition to that whole kind of thing. So the Rebbe said, "What are you holding?" He said, "It's for me. It's not for enough. It's not for you." So what are you holding? So he took the book and he gave it to the Rebbe. It was in Greek, and the Rebbe closed his eyes. He flipped through it. He stopped at a page, and Baal Peh, he started to read what was on the page in Greek. Kach Chatuv. So that means that now we should learn Greek and start learning, of course not. The Rebbe is something else. Moshe Rabbeinu is something else. Klolus Kol HaTorah, Tzaddik Emes. Something else. Loy Lalamid, like we're not supposed to use this to learn for everything else. Okay, but that's what's being said here. A Moshe Rabbeinu Tzaddik, who's literally Gematria Taryag, who's the Klolus of Kol HaTorah, who's called the Daas of Am Yisrael, this is Moshe Rabbeinu. Says the Rebbe, going back inside of B'shvil zeh hayatzarech lifresh as atzmai mikol v'kol. He needed to rectify this area mikol v'kol. K'moshe kasav va'ata poi amoidi madi. Everyone else was told to go back to their wives, and Hashem said, Moshe Rabbeinu, ata poi amoidi madi. Ubillam, Billam. As is known, that whatever Moshe Rabbeinu is on the side of holiness, Billam is on the side of unholiness. Kamoshe Kosov, the idea Das Elyon. Chazal tell us like Kam Kamoshe, and Chazal say Yisrael like Kam Kamoshe, but B'umas Olam Kam. In Klal Yisrael there was nobody who arose like Moshe Rabbeinu, but in the nations of the world there was. Umihu Billam. The idea Das Elyon, because the reference to Das is made with regard to Billam as well. Gam, says the Rebbe, not only that, but if you wanted to know on the level of name, because Moshe Rabbeinu is Gematria Taryag, that l'cha'era there should be something in the name Billam that's also a reference to the Torah, says the Rebbe, you're absolutely right. Gam oisiyos Billam, the Ramzim shu b'klipa. Billam, the letters, the 4 letters, Beis, Lamed, Ayin, Mem, show that Billam is in the klipa. Keneged HaTorah. Keneged HaTorah. How do you know? Ki Beis Yaskalas HaTorah. Very simple. Beis is the first letter of the Torah. V'Lamed is Soif HaTorah. Ayin is Keneged the Ayin Panim. Umem Keneged Mem Yom Shenit in the Torah. So Billam's very name demonstrates this, that he's in the contrast to the holiness, to the kedusha of the Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu's name is Taryag. Billam, Beis, the first letter of the Torah. Lamed, the last letter of the Torah. Ayin, the Shivim Panim of the Torah. And the Mem Yom Shenitna Torah. So Umachma Shuhu B'Klipa, now that Billam is in the Klipa of the Torah, Lafika Hu Meshuka B'Taiva Hazais B'Yoser. That's why he finds himself Meshuka in this Taiva B'Yoser, Kamashikosav Ahaskin Eskanti, like Chazal Darshan on that pasuk where the donkey is telling Billam, did this ever happen to you before? But it says in the Gemara in Saita, Ahaskin Eskanti is actually a lashon of relations. Billam was with his donkey. So he was the opposite of this. I just want to point out that Lefi, what we began with in the beginning of the Torah, it isn't just that Billam is the opposite, because in Likutei Moharan specifically, but in Hasidus, there is no absolute klal. Like you don't put the label of something on something else, especially if that label is a negative one, understanding that at the core of everything is toiv, there's no ra. So we can't say, oh, that's what Billam was. Misheshis me perishus, Billam is a bad guy, Billam is the klipa of the Torah, Billam is stuck in this stuff, and that's how it is. Well, there's no such thing. According to what we're saying, adarabba ve'adarabba. Do you know what kind of Torah was in gestation by Billam? Billam's whole name is the Torah Akdasha. Billam is mamish supposed to be Moshe Rabbeinu for the Umas Ha'olam. The klipa means that in his bechira he doesn't make it through. It's a very different way of looking at it. A person reads this on the surface, he's like, Moshe Rabbeinu was holy, Billam was terrible. It's a very childish way to process reality. It's a very black and white, oversimplified, binary sort of. It's either 0 or 1. It's either good or. Chassidus and Kabbalah really, but Chassidus came to bring nuance into our consciousness, to be able to realize there are gradations to reality. It's things are not so simple. Things are multifaceted. Things are well defined. Memela, you look back at Billam, which we're talking about in the context of Torah Lamed Vav and what we've learned about the necessity to go through gullus, to go through exile, to go through challenges, to go through nisayon, to go through, like we said, menasin u'mitzarfen. And then a person's able to access giluyim. So then, on the contrary, you look back at Billam and you say, Billam he was giving birth to Lamed Beis, Lamed Ayin Mem, all of the necessary elements that you need for the hisgalus of the Torah Kipshuta. Mimela, Billam was stuck in the worst of the worst. Understand? Not because he's in the klipa and that's the divinely mandated position for Billam is that's what it is. No. Billam has to work through what he has to work through to get where he needs to go. What's the chilik between Billam and Moshe, according to what we're saying? Very little. Very little. It's only one thing. You can put it in this nusach. Billam gave up. That's the nusach. Billam gave up, and Moshe didn't give up. In other words, and the Rabbi Nachman's going to say this, mamish, almost explicitly in Tarkov Tesvav, which we'll get to. Moshe Rabbeinu is what's called, the Rebbe calls it there, Daas Kol Yisrael, and he realizes that challenges are for the purpose of enabling us to get to where we need to go, and that there's no such thing as a resolute obstacle. And Ein Shem Yush Ba'olam Klal, and Ein Shem Chayma Ba'olam Klal, which is another lashon, and in Torah Mem Vav in the Likutei Moharan. And Mamela, because he's enlightened to this understanding of what challenges are, there's no stopping by Moshe Rabbeinu. He pushes through. I understand there's a bit of a controversy, actually, specifically between Lubavitch and some others, because in Lubavitch, the Taavas Yisrael at the very end of the Mishnah in Kedushin, that brings that apocryphal story about Moshe Rabbeinu, Ki Yadua, right? You're familiar with that story that Moshe Rabbeinu, there was a king who went and sent somebody out to the desert to take a portrait of Moshe Rabbeinu so the king could understand his nature. And so he sent him out to we were just having this conversation actually on a Torah chat recently, and he sent an artist, and the artist went out and he drew the picture of Moshe Rabbeinu and he brought it back to the king and he said, this is impossible. So why is it impossible? So the king says, I know chachmas hapartzuf. I already understood how to be able to sense a person's tchunas hanefesh from looking at their face. And he says, this is the face of a wicked man. The Taavas Yisrael brings this. There were those who ripped it out of the Mishnah because they were out of the commentary. And I think Lubavitch, if I'm not mistaken, is very sharp against this because the Chazal tell us Nismal Abayis Kula Oira, and Moshe Rabbeinu was Toiv, Tuvia, and he was born. He was already Toiv, but this is what he brings out. And I think it's quite maybe Elu ve'elu. I have to think about always how to synthesize, but I think it's a very very profound concept. The king said, how could this be? This is the righteous Messiah leader, of Klai Yisrael. Efshar. So the king said, I have to go out and meet him myself. So he gets in the wagon. Again, this is not in a medrash. And one of the reasons that it's so controversial is because the same exact story is told about Napoleon. Not Napoleon, what was his name? Alexander the Great. So there are those who say, it's not in any of our sources, and Adarabah we find it. Okay, but the point, I think, remains. The king went out to the midbar, and he goes and meets with Moshe Rabbeinu, and he sees it's mamash identical to the person. And he says, Eichlev Shar, I see that your face is the face of a person who's wicked, but you're the most righteous person. And Moshe Rabbeinu is quoted again by the Tiferes Yisrael. I can look this up in the last Mishnah in Kedushin, last Mishnah in Shas, where he says, yes, it is true. It is true. He says, what you see in the picture is exactly what I was born with. And in order to become who I became, I had to work through all of those midas rise. That's what it says. Moshe Rabbeinu. On what level is this true? On what, how does this offend our sensibilities and so on? This is kach katuf. Moshe Rabbeinu worked through this stuff because Moshe Rabbeinu is the tzaddik emes. Moshe Rabbeinu is the goyel. Moshe Rabbeinu is connected to the pnimius of everything. All pnimius haTorah. Moshe Rabbeinu came first. He's the first of the chameshes yichidei adaros. It's Moshe Rabbeinu and then Rashbi, then R Yaakov. Is that right? Moshe Rabbeinu is this. So, trying to say something. The difference between kedusha and tumah is not as stark and as bold a line as you think. The ultimate difference between kedusha and tumah is whether you give up or whether you don't give up. Finding it hard to articulate this. The crux of emunah, the crux and the core of emunah is as it relates to challenging nisyonos, and whether a person embraces them and brings Hashem into it, which is hope, and therefore finds the capacity to carry on. And the loss of emunah is to say, God is not present in my struggle, in my challenge, and therefore I'm at the end. That is the core, fundamental essence of where a person is on their spiritual and emotional journey. Have we given up, Chas v'shalom, or have we not yet given up? And because when you refine Yiddishkeit down to this principle, through the process of history, you get to this nekuda. So this is the nekuda of Rabbeinu HaKadosh. This is the nekuda of Rabbi Nachman's whole thing. Ein shum yish ba'olam klal. Because at this point in history, let's just get down to the point, right? Let's get to the kernel, to the essential essence of what needs to be refined throughout this whole process of Sheish Alfi Shana before we get to the revelation of Mashiach Tzidkenu, B'bias Goyal Tzedek, right? Let's get to that inner point. Says the Rebbe, okay, let's do it. This is what it comes down to. How does a person relate to Hashem in a moment of severe struggle, challenge, stuckness, impurity? Do we stay there like Billam and Mamela become the klipa of everything that Moshe Rabbeinu represented, where the whole Torah Kedusha Beis, right, Beis, Lamed, Ayin, Mem stays in potential and nothing comes of it? Or do we find the courage and the strength to push past like Moshe Rabbeinu? That's the whole Yiddishkeit. The whole Yiddishkeit can be abstracted down to this one principle, and very possible that this is what Habakkuk was referring to when he said, "B'Habakkuk v'amidan alachas v'tzadik be'emunasa yichya." Do you carry on? Do you carry on? V'tzadik be'emunasa yichya. Tzaddikim afilu b'misasam kriyim Chaim. Right? Why? Because shenamar yelchu michayil el chayil. Tzaddikim ein lemenucha loy ba'olam hazeh loy ba'olam haba. Because the tzaddikim are constantly moving. Go back to Torah Chav Beis, Pnim to Makif, Makif to Pnim to Makif. They're never stopping. Nukuda tachtoina to Nukuda yoyna Torah Vav. Right? And constantly moving. And each and every time encountering a new challenge on their madrega. And they pushed past that as well. When Moshe Rabbeinu got to the point where the pasuk says La yuchal oid latzis v'lava, he's no longer able to come out and to go in. Says Reb Tzaddik, what's La yuchal oid latzis v'lava? Means Moshe Rabbeinu stopped on this earthly journey, having his own, again on his level, experiences of aliyah and yerida. That's what he meant. La yuchal oid latzis v'lava. So bechin of ratzav v'shoy. That's stopped by him. Rebekah, right? Nichnas v'shalom yatzav v'shalom. He was no longer able to go through that process. As Moshe Rabbeinu, okay, so what is he going to do? He's going to die. What if he's going to die? He's going to give up? No. Dying in this world is being born into the next. In other words, Adarabah. If Moshe Rabbeinu would have kept on living, that would be giving up. He becomes resigned to this reality. No, this is where I am. I plateau. Moshe Rabbeinu says, I'm going to die. You know why I'm going to die? Because la yuchal latzis v'lavai. I'm no longer able to go through this process. I've reached the barrier. So what are you going to do? I have to leave this world. You know who else said the same exact thing? Rabbi Nachman. In Sichas Iran, he said, I've reached the point, he said at the end of his very short life, 39 years old, he said, I can no longer reach any madrega higher than I currently am. I need to take off this body. That's it. I need to take off this body. I'm at the pinnacle. I have to leave this world. These are shocking sentiments. But that's how it is for the tzaddik. Yeah.
But we learned so much about Moshe Rabbeinu at the end that he wanted to go into Israel. In Medrashim, we learned that he said, I will be the Talmud and Yeshua will be in charge. It seemed like he didn't want to go. I can understand on one level, maybe he would. But.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, on the level that's outside of the Ratzon Hashem, right, so to speak, for him. And then, but remember when Hashem says, don't daven another tefillah, yeah. He doesn't daven another tefillah, right? So meaning, in his mind, and obviously Moshe Rabbeinu is still human, but on the level of the ultimate necessity for Moshe Rabbeinu to reach Shar Nun, right, Har Nevai, right, the Arizal says Nun Bai when Moshe Rabbeinu is nifter, and then he accesses all the madrigas. He can't do that while he's still in the physical world. So what he needed to do for his tikkun was rising higher and higher, and that's what's being learned about over here. Let's finish the paragraph. Gam Yosef and Tzaddik as well. Koydem shahaisale is galus b'Torah, prior to the revelation of Torah being experienced by Yosef at Tzaddik. Hainu chachma ubina. Yosef at Tzaddik needs to experience chachma and bina. Kamashakasav of reishis chachma. Torah is called chachma ki im lebina tikra. Right, like Chazal say, based on the pasuk of Mishlei, Torah is called bina. V'koydim shezach l'esgalas haTorah. Right, so before the revelation of Torah, which is on the one hand reishis chachma and also bina. So before that, Hutzrach Lavai B'nisayon B'tseirov B'seich Hatayva HaKlala Shel Shivim Lashon Kanal. Hanal, he needed to go through this nisayon. You know, if you just read the psukim themselves, it seems like it wasn't much of a nisayon. He wasn't interested. Yosef came to the thing. She was the one who was driving him crazy. And it was more of like an annoyance than an actually highly eroticized moment, right? It was just like, get away from me. You know, it's like this crazy hag was running after you. He throws off his thing and he runs outside. That's it, right? But in the Medrash, it's not so simple. Yosef HaTzadik ended up releasing Zerah out of his fingertips. Chazal say, Yosef, it was a major nisayon. There needed to be a lot of crying out, of ayin kalin, of anguished, frenetic, urgent pain, desperation, coming out of Yosef HaTzadik in that moment to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Something much more familiar to so many of us. That's what Yosef went through. It wasn't an easy thing. He had to go through that. That's what Chutzrich Lava B'nisayon B'tseiruf. He needed to be, like we said, Ketzraf Kesef. He needed to be refined. B'soich HaTayva Klali Shel Shivim Lashon HaNizka Le'el, which is this point of Pgama Bris. Once he went through that process and he overcame it and he cried out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and he didn't let go of who he was and he stayed firm and rooted and he utilized that energy to cry out to Hashem in those 70 times. So then Zachal Apri, he broke the klipa, broke past the ceiling, and then he finds himself in a brand new reality. And then he's able to access the Torah Kadosha, which is Chachma and Bina, Kamay Shekasal, like it says by Yosef, Ein Navain V'Chacham Kamaycha. After that process of them being thrown into the bar, which is also another Nakuda, ultimately Yosef is taken out, and Paro says to him, Achar Haidia Elikim Eschaz Kol Zos, after HaKadosh Baruch Hu has availed you all of this, Haidia, Daas, like Moshe Rabbeinu, Ein Navain V'Chacham Kamaycha. Right, it's a fascinating thing, and with this we'll end for today. It's a fascinating thing just on the level of text, where you find mamish the Kabbalistic structure of Das as it holds Chacham and Bina in that pasuk. Achrei Haidia Das Elikim Eschaz Kol Zos Ein Navain V'Chacham Kamaycha. Das is the conjugation between Chachma and Bina. How did he get the Chachma and Bina? Hiskalus, Leda, Geula, by going through the Hester, by going through that experience of Sar Leda, of the birth pangs, the Chavli Leda, as in addition to the Gullus. And only once a person goes through that, but like Moshe Rabbeinu, whose name is Taryag, we need to reveal Torah from within ourselves. Never give up. Can't give up. That's the whole Yisoid Kedushas Yisrael, is not giving up. That's what Emunah is. V'emunascha b'leilos, then a person manages to break through. Otherwise, it's Billam, who has the same capacities to mamish Yodea Das Elyon, Beis, Perishus, Lam B'leini Kol Yisrael, Ayin Padam of the Torah Mem. But he loses that point of awareness, and he finds it impossible to carry on, and ultimately Billam is Billam in history, and Moshe Rabbeinu is Moshe Rabbeinu. Ezras Hashem, we will continue with our morning shir on Thursday. On Thursday. Yeah, there's no shir tomorrow's Wednesday, but Ezras Hashem will continue on Thursday morning. We're in Manchester today and tomorrow, and Ezras Hashem looking forward to continuing with Ois Gimel, with the end of Ois Gimel when we return.
ואתה האב שלי שכל כך אוהב אותי, האב שלי מלך חי וקיים על כל נשימה שאני